You are a liability. That sentence cut deeper than the freezing Chicago wind howling outside. My son kicked me out of my own house while his wife watched from the window, rubbing her pregnant belly like it was a weapon she had just used to execute me. He left me to stand in the snow with nothing but a trash bag of old clothes. He thought I was finished. He thought I was just a useless old man who would fade away into the night. But he did not know that 5 years later, he would be on his knees in my office trembling and begging the mysterious owner of his debt for mercy. I spun my executive chair around and smiled at his terrified face. Now is the time to learn the price of betrayal. Before I tell you how I rose from the ashes to destroy those who hurt me, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me share these stories with people who need to know they are not alone. And tell me in the comments, what is the most ungrateful thing a family member has ever done to you? Riodsa, every single one. The sound of porcelain shattering against the hardwood floor was louder than a gunshot. That was how it started. Not with a conversation, but with a crash. We were sitting at the dinner table, the solid oak table I had built with my own hands 30 years ago, the same table where I taught my son Lucas how to do his math homework. I reached for the tureen to serve myself a second helping of soup. That was my crime. My hand, the right one, gave a sudden, violent jerk. It was a tremor I had lived with since 1998, a souvenir from a construction accident when I saved a fellow ironworker from a falling steel beam. That accident crushed my nerves, but it kept a man alive. My son knew this. He knew that every scar on my body was the price I paid to put him through private school and university. But in that moment, the history did not matter. The ladle slipped. Hot tomato bisque splashed across the table runner and onto the skirt of Tiffany's dress. For a second, there was silence. I felt the heat of the soup burning the back of my hand, but I did not make a sound. I just looked down, feeling that familiar shame of being old and losing control of my own body. Then Tiffany stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "You clumsy old fool! Look at what you did!" She was not screaming because she was burned. The soup had barely touched her. She was screaming because of the fabric. "This is imported Italian silk, Henry. Do you have any idea how much this costs?" Of course you don't. You just sit there and ruin everything you touch. I grabbed a napkin, my hands shaking worse now, trying to dab the table. "I am sorry, Tiffany. I will pay for the dry cleaning." It was just a spasm. My hand, it just locked up. Lucas, my son, the boy I raised alone after his mother passed, did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask if this boiling soup had scalded my skin. He jumped up and rushed to his wife, grabbing a cloth to frantically wipe the tiny spot on her dress. "Babe, are you okay?" "Don't move, let me get the stain remover." I sat there invisible. The pain in my hand was throbbing, but the pain in my chest was unbearable. I looked at Lucas. He was 32 years old, a man grown, but in front of this woman, he was a servant. I had built skyscrapers. I had managed crews of 200 tough men on high-rise projects. And here I was, afraid to look my daughter-in-law in the eye in the house that I had paid for. Tiffany pushed Lucas away and glared at me. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or empathy. She put a protective hand over her stomach, which was barely showing a bump yet. "I cannot do this anymore, Lucas. I really cannot. My doctor said I need a stress-free environment for the baby. This." She gestured at me like I was a pile of garbage. "This is the opposite of stress-free. He is dangerous, Lucas. What if next time it is not soup? What if he drops a knife? What if he leaves the gas on?" I looked up, stunned. I have never left the gas on in my life. I am a structural engineer, for God's sake. My mind is sharp even if my hands are tired. "Lucas," I said, my voice quiet. "It was an accident. You know about my nerve damage." Lucas finally looked at me, but his eyes were shifting, avoiding mine. He looked at the wall, at the floor, anywhere but at his father. "Dad, look, Tiffany is right. You are getting difficult. The tremors are getting worse. And with the baby coming, we have to prioritize safety." "Safety?" I asked. "I built this house, Lucas. I laid the foundation. I framed these walls. You think I am a danger to my own grandchild?" Tiffany slammed her hand on the table. "Stop making this about you, Henry. You always make it about you. This is about my child, my baby. I will not have a senile old man shaking and breaking things around my newborn. It is too much." She turned to Lucas, her voice dropping to that dangerous, icy whisper that I had learned to fear. "You have a choice to make, Lucas. Right now. It is him or us. I am not spending another night under the same roof as him. Either you get him out of here tonight, or I am packing my bags and going to my mother's. And you won't see me or this baby until he is gone." The room went dead silent. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. I waited. I waited for my son to laugh. I waited for him to tell her that she was being unreasonable, that this was his father, that it was 10 degrees below zero outside. I waited for him to show a spine. But Lucas just sighed. It was a long, defeated sigh. He looked at me, and I saw the decision in his eyes before he even spoke. The realization hit me harder than any physical blow. He was not going to fight for me. He was going to sacrifice me to keep her happy. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking slightly. Maybe it is best if you go. Just for a while. Just until the baby is born and things settle down." I stared at him. "Go. Go where, Lucas? It is 9 o'clock at night. It is freezing outside." "There is a motel on State Street," he mumbled, pulling his wallet out. "I will give you cash. Just pack a bag, Dad. Please, don't make a scene. Tiffany needs peace. Don't make a scene." I had given him everything. I had sold my stocks to fund his failing restaurant. I had signed the deed of this house over to him so he could get a loan. And now I was being asked to leave quietly so I wouldn't disturb the woman who hated me. I stood up slowly. My knees popped. I looked at Tiffany. She was smirking. It was a subtle, triumphant little smile that vanished as soon as Lucas looked at her, replaced by a mask of distress. "You are doing the right thing, honey," she cooed, touching Lucas's arm. "Think of the baby." I walked to my room on the first floor. It used to be the master bedroom, but they had moved me down to the small guest room near the laundry when they got married. I did not argue then, and I did not argue now. I felt numb. A coldness had spread from my heart to my fingertips, numbing the burn from the soup. I took a black trash bag from the closet because Lucas had borrowed my suitcase for their honeymoon to Cabo and never gave it back. I opened my drawers. I packed 2 sweaters, my blood pressure medication, and a framed photo of my late wife, Catherine. I looked at her smiling face in the photo. I whispered to her, "I am sorry, Catherine. I failed. I raised a coward." When I walked back into the living room, Lucas was standing by the door holding a wad of cash. He looked like he wanted to vomit. Good. I hoped his guilt would eat him alive. "Here, Dad," he said, shoving the money at me. "It is $40. That should cover a night or two." $40. In Chicago. That wouldn't even buy a meal in a decent place, let alone a hotel room. But I took it. I didn't say a word. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of hearing me beg. Tiffany called out from the kitchen loud enough for me to hear. "Make sure he leaves his key, Lucas. We don't want him wandering back in while we are sleeping." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key. The key to the door I had installed. I dropped it on the side table. It made a heavy thud. "You are making a mistake, Lucas," I said, my voice steady, no longer shaking. "Not because you are kicking me out, but because you think this woman loves you. She loves what you can give her. And once you have nothing left, she will treat you exactly the way she is treating me. "Get out!" Tiffany screamed from the kitchen. "Just get out!" Lucas opened the door. A blast of icy wind hit me instantly, biting through my thin cardigan. "Just go, Dad," Lucas whispered, pushing me gently but firmly across the threshold. "You are a liability to this family right now." The door slammed shut. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. Click. The sound of my life ending. I stood there on the porch for a moment, the snow instantly wetting my socks. I looked through the window. I saw Lucas walk back to the dining table. I saw Tiffany wrap her arms around his neck and kiss him. They were celebrating. They had just thrown an old man out into a blizzard, and they were celebrating. I turned around and faced the dark, frozen street. I had no car. Lucas had sold it last month, claiming I was too old to drive. I started walking towards the bus stop, the wind tearing at my eyes. But as I walked, something strange happened. The numbness faded, and in its place a fire started to burn. A cold, hard fire. They thought I was a liability. They thought I was finished. I gripped the trash bag tighter. I would survive this night, and I would survive the next. And one day I would make them wish they had never opened that door. I stood in the center of the guest room, the room that was barely larger than a prison cell, holding a black plastic trash bag. It was a hefty bag, usually reserved for kitchen scraps and yard waste. Now it was my luggage. I had looked for my suitcase, a vintage leather Samsonite that I had bought in 1985 for my first business trip to Tokyo as a chief engineer. It was a sturdy bag built to last, just like everything I used to value. But it was gone. Then I remembered. Lucas had borrowed it 3 years ago for his honeymoon in Cabo. He said he liked the vintage aesthetic. He never returned it, and when I asked for it back last Christmas, he told me he had lost it at the airport. I knew he was lying. I had seen it in his walk-in closet just last week, sitting there gathering dust. So here I was, packing my entire life into a garbage bag because my son had stolen my dignity along with my luggage. I moved mechanically, my body on autopilot, while my mind struggled to process the reality of the situation. I opened the dresser drawer. I took out 2 pairs of corduroy trousers, the ones that were fraying at the hem. I took 3 shirts, all of them flannel, because I get cold easily these days. I reached for my blood pressure medication on the nightstand. The bottle rattled in the silence of the room. It was half empty. I wondered if I would be able to afford a refill when it ran out. Probably not. My hand hovered over the framed photograph of Catherine on the bedside table. It was taken the day we closed on the land for this house. She was laughing, pointing at the empty lot where the foundation would be poured. We had so many dreams then. I picked it up. The glass was cool against my skin. I wrapped it carefully in one of the flannel shirts. I could not let it break. If the glass broke, I think I would shatter right along with it. I tied the knot on the trash bag. It was light. It was 72 years of life, of working 80-hour weeks, of building bridges and skyscrapers, and it all boiled down to 10 pounds of old clothes in a plastic sack. I looked around the room one last time. There was nothing else here for me. No warmth. No love. Just the faint smell of lavender detergent that Tiffany used, a smell that now made my stomach turn. I walked out into the hallway. The house was quiet, but it was a tense silence, the kind that screams. I could hear the television on in the master bedroom upstairs. They were probably watching a reality show, pretending that they hadn't just executed the patriarch of the family. Lucas was waiting for me by the front door. He was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, tapping his foot impatiently. He wanted this over with. He wanted me gone so he could go back to his comfortable life, the life I had paid for. I reached for the coat rack. It was freezing outside, a typical Chicago winter night, where the wind cuts through you like a knife. My eyes landed on the heavy gray wool coat hanging on the hook. It was thick, lined with fleece. It was the only thing that could protect me against the 10 degrees below zero temperature waiting for me on the other side of that door. I reached out to grab it, my fingers brushing the rough wool. Suddenly, Lucas's hand shot out and snatched the coat away. "No, Dad. You can't take that one." I froze, my hand suspended in midair. "Lucas, it is freezing out there. That is the warmest coat in the house." "It is a designer coat, Dad," he said, clutching it to his chest like a child protecting a toy. "Tiffany bought this for me last Christmas. It cost $600. You are not wearing a $600 coat to a motel. You will ruin it." I looked at him, truly looked at him. This was the boy I had carried on my shoulders when he was too tired to walk. This was the boy whose tuition I paid by working double shifts on high-rise girders in the middle of winter. And now he was denying me warmth because of a brand label. "Wear your old parka," he said, kicking a pile of shoes near the mat. "The blue one." "It is fine." The blue parka was thin. The zipper was broken. The stuffing was coming out of the right sleeve. It was a jacket for a cool autumn day, not a Chicago blizzard. But I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy to fight him for a piece of fabric. I picked up the blue parka and struggled to put it on. My arthritis made it hard to get my arm through the sleeve, and Lucas just watched. He didn't offer to help. He just watched his father struggle. As I pulled the broken zipper up as far as it would go, Lucas stepped closer. He lowered his voice as if sharing a secret, but his words were venom. "Look, Dad, don't look at me like that. This isn't personal. Tiffany just needs positive space right now. She is very sensitive to smells." "Smells?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," Lucas said, wrinkling his nose slightly. "You know, you have that scent. The old person smell. It lingers on the furniture. It lingers in the hallway. It makes her nauseous. She has morning sickness, Dad. We can't risk her health just because you want to be comfortable. You understand, right? You have to understand." I felt like he had slapped me. I showered every day. I used soap. I took care of myself. But to them, my very existence was a pollutant. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a smell. I was a stain. I was something to be scrubbed away. "I understand, Lucas," I said. "I understand perfectly." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a bill. He shoved it into my hand. It was a $20 note. It was crumpled, soft, and dirty. "Here," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Get some food. Or a cab. Whatever. Just don't call the house phone tonight. Okay, we need to sleep." I looked at the $20. $20 for a lifetime of sacrifice. It wasn't even enough to buy a ticket out of town. It was insult money. It was hush money. I gripped the trash bag in one hand and the crumpled bill in the other. I stepped toward the door. Lucas reached past me and unlocked it. He opened it wide and the wind invaded the house instantly. Snowflakes swirled into the foyer, landing on the expensive hardwood floor I had installed. "Go on, Dad," he said, making a shooing motion with his hand. "Before you let all the heat out." I stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit me with physical force, stealing the breath from my lungs. The snow was already ankle deep. I turned around to say one last thing, maybe to tell him I loved him despite everything, or maybe to curse him. I don't know. But I never got the chance. Lucas didn't even say goodbye. He just grabbed the handle and slammed the door shut. The sound was deafening in the quiet night. Then came the sound that would haunt my nightmares for years. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place. It was a heavy metallic thud. Clack. It sounded exactly like a hammer driving the final nail into a coffin. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. Through the frosted glass, I saw Lucas's shadow move away. He didn't look back. He turned off the porch light, plunging me into darkness. I was alone. I was 72 years old. I had $20, a bag of flannel shirts, and a broken heart. The wind howled around me, mocking me. I turned my back on the house that I built, the house that was no longer my home, and I took the first step into the abyss of the night. The walk to the bus station felt like a death march. My feet were already numb inside my thin leather shoes, the kind of shoes meant for office carpets, not for trudging through 6 inches of fresh snow. The wind in Chicago does not just blow against you. It hunts you. It finds every gap in your zipper, every hole in your scarf, and it bites down hard. I kept my head down, clutching that black plastic bag against my chest, like it was a chest of gold. In a way it was. It held the only dry clothes I owned. I turned the corner onto Michigan Avenue and stopped dead in my tracks. I had not intended to come this way, but habit is a powerful ghost. There it was, rising out of the swirling mist and snow like a titan of glass and steel. Caldwell Plaza. It was 50 stories of architectural perfection. The lights from the offices high above twinkled like stars. I stood there on the sidewalk, shivering violently, but for a moment the cold did not matter. I looked up at the intricate lattice work of the steel beams on the 3rd floor facade. I remembered the day we set those beams. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was not 72 years old anymore. I was 40. I was standing on a girder 500 feet in the air, the wind whipping my hair, a radio in my hand. I could hear the crane operator waiting for my command. I could see 500 men in hard hats looking up at me, waiting for my signal. I was the structural engineer. I was the brain behind the beast. I was respected. When I spoke, steel moved. When I gave an order, concrete poured. I was powerful. I was useful. I opened my eyes. The vision vanished. I was just an old man with a runny nose and a garbage bag standing in the shadow of my own creation. I looked at the revolving doors of the lobby. I saw the golden light spilling out onto the pavement. I saw a security guard standing inside, warm and dry. He looked bored. I took a step toward the door. Just for a second, I thought about going in. I thought about walking up to the desk and saying that I built this place, that my name was on the plaque behind the concierge desk. I just wanted 5 minutes of warmth, but I stopped. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the building. I saw a scarecrow. My hair was disheveled. My face was red and blotchy from the cold, and I was clutching a trash bag. If I walked in there, that guard would not see the chief engineer. He would see a vagrant. He would see a liability. He would drag me out before I could even open my mouth. The irony tasted like bile in my throat. I had spent my life building shelters for millions of people. I had built apartments, hospitals, offices. I had built an entire skyline. And yet here I was, locked out of the very world I helped construct. I turned away from the building. I could not bear to look at it anymore. It was mocking me. I continued toward the bus stop, a lonely metal bench under a flickering street lamp about 2 blocks down. The street was deserted. Sensible people were inside drinking cocoa, watching television with their families. Then I heard laughter. It was loud, raucous laughter. I stiffened. 3 young men turned the corner. They were stumbling, shoving each other, clearly drunk. They wore expensive parkas and designer boots. They looked like college students coming home from a bar full of youth and arrogance. I tried to make myself small. I tried to blend into the brick wall of the alleyway. But one of them saw me. "Hey, look at this," one of them shouted, pointing a gloved finger at me. "Santa Claus is taking out the trash." They surrounded me. The smell of cheap whiskey and expensive cologne filled the air. They were not hardened criminals. They were just bored, entitled boys who felt invincible. "What is in the bag, Pops?" the tallest one asked, reaching out. "Please," I said, my voice trembling. "It is just clothes, just old laundry." He laughed. "Let us see then. Maybe you got some treasures in there." He grabbed the bag. I held on. I do not know why I held on. There was nothing of value in there except my wife's photo. But it was mine. It was the only thing I had left. "Let go," he snapped. He shoved me. I was weak from hunger and the cold. I lost my footing on a patch of black ice and went down hard. My hip hit the concrete with a sickening crack. Pain exploded up my spine. The bag ripped open. My flannel shirts and old trousers spilled out into the slush. The picture of Catherine slid across the ice face down. The boys laughed. "Look at this junk," one said, kicking my trousers into a puddle. The tall one looked down at me. He saw Lucas's crumpled $20 bill sticking out of my pocket. He snatched it. "Thanks for the beer money, Grandpa," he sneered. They walked away laughing, leaving me lying in the snow surrounded by my scattered life. I watched them go. I did not scream for help. Who would come? I slowly pushed myself up. My hip was screaming in agony. I crawled over to the picture frame. The glass was cracked, a spiderweb fracture right over Catherine's smile. I sat there in the snow holding the broken picture. The wind howled through the canyon of buildings, and that is when the tears finally came. I did not cry because I was cold. I did not cry because I had lost $20. I did not even cry because my hip felt like it was on fire. I cried because of the realization that hit me harder than the pavement. I had spent 40 years building foundations for skyscrapers. I calculated load-bearing walls, wind resistance, and stress factors. I made sure every building could withstand the harshest storms. But I had failed to build the most important foundation of all. I had failed to build a family that could withstand the storm of time. I had constructed a city, but I had not constructed a home. I had poured concrete, but I had forgotten to pour love into the right places. I had invested in steel, and steel is cold. Now the cold was all I had left. I gathered what clothes I could salvage, stuffing them back into the torn plastic bag. I could not stay here. If I stayed here, I would freeze to death before morning. I saw a neon sign flickering down the block. A bank. An ATM vestibule. I limped toward it. I swiped my old debit card. Even though the account was empty, the door buzzed and clicked open. I stepped inside. The air was stale and smelled of ozone, but it was warm. It was heated. I slid down into the corner away from the glass, so the police patrols would not see me easily. I pulled the torn blue parka tight around me. I hugged the bag of wet clothes. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the cash machine. It was the sound of money, the sound of the thing that had destroyed my family. I drifted into a restless sleep on the dirty tile floor, an architect of the city sleeping in a glass box, dreaming of a house that no longer existed. I woke up to the sound of knuckles rapping sharply against glass. It was a police officer standing outside the ATM vestibule. He did not look angry. He just looked tired. He mouthed the words, "Move along." I nodded and gathered my trash bag. My body felt like it was made of rusted iron. Every joint screamed in protest as I stood up. The hip I had injured falling on the ice was throbbing with a dull, sickening heat. I stepped out into the morning light. The snow had stopped falling, but the city was covered in a gray slush that splashed against my ankles with every step. I was hungry, cold, and humiliated, but I was not hopeless. Not yet. I had a destination. I walked 3 blocks to the First National Bank on Dearborn Street. This was where I kept my life savings. $450,000. It was money I had saved over 40 years. It was money earned from working double shifts on Christmas Eve. It was money earned from risking my life on suspension bridges in high winds. It was my freedom fund. I had planned to use it to travel to Italy, a trip Catherine and I never got to take. Now it would be my survival fund. I would rent a small apartment. I would buy a warm coat. I would hire a lawyer. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the bank. The warmth of the lobby hit me, smelling of stale coffee and carpet cleaner. It felt like heaven. A security guard near the door took a step toward me, his hand hovering over his belt. I knew what he saw. He saw a homeless man with a garbage bag. "I am a customer," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my throat was dry and scratchy. I have an account here. He looked me up and down, lingering on my torn parka and the bruise forming on my cheek, but he stepped back. I walked to the teller counter. The woman behind the glass was young, with bright red lipstick and a name tag that read, Jennifer. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, not making eye contact. "My name is Henry Caldwell," I said, placing my old debit card on the counter. "I want to make a withdrawal, a large one." She sighed and picked up the card. "Do you have identification?" I fumbled in my pocket and produced my driver's license. She took it, typed something into her computer, and waited. I stood there rubbing my hands together to get the circulation back. I was already planning my next hour. I would go to a diner and order eggs and coffee. Then I would check into a hotel. A nice one. Jennifer frowned at her screen. She typed again, harder this time. Then she looked up at me, her expression changing from annoyance to confusion. "Mr. Caldwell, I cannot process a withdrawal." "Why not?" I asked. "Is the system down?" "No, sir," she said slowly. "The system is fine, but there are insufficient funds." I laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. "That is impossible, Jennifer. There is nearly $500,000 in that account. Please check again. It is a savings account ending in 409. She turned the monitor slightly so she could see it better, but she did not show me. "Sir, I am looking at the account right now. The current balance is $0.00. The account was closed this morning." The room started to spin. The floor felt like it was tilting under my feet. "Closed," I whispered. "That is a mistake. I did not close it. I was outside all night." She clicked a few more keys. The closure was authorized at 9:01 this morning. The funds were transferred via wire. Transferred by who? I demanded, my voice rising. "I am the only one on that account. It is in my name only." Jennifer looked uncomfortable. She lowered her voice. "The transfer was authorized by a Mr. Lucas Caldwell. He is listed as your power of attorney." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Power of attorney. I never gave Lucas power of attorney. I was of sound mind. I handled my own finances. Then a memory flashed in my mind like a lightning strike. 6 months ago. I was in the hospital for a minor hernia surgery. I was groggy from the anesthesia. Lucas had come in with a stack of papers. "Dad," he had said, smiling that boyish smile. "These are just the insurance forms and the hospital release waivers. You need to sign them so I can pick up your prescriptions and handle the billing disputes." I had trusted him. He was my son. I signed where he pointed. I did not read the fine print. I did not see that buried in the stack of medical forms was a durable power of attorney, granting him full control over my assets if I was deemed incapacitated, or apparently even if I wasn't. "He tricked me," I whispered. "He tricked me into signing my life away." I gripped the counter. My knuckles turned white. "Show me," I said. "Show me where the money went." Jennifer hesitated. "Sir, technically, since the account is closed—" "Show me," I shouted. It was a roar of pure agony. People in the lobby turned to stare. The security guard started walking toward us. Jennifer quickly turned the screen toward me. I looked at the transaction history. It wasn't just a single transfer. It was a feeding frenzy. The dates went back 2 weeks. He had been draining me dry even before he kicked me out. I read the lines, and each one was a dagger in my heart. Transaction 1. Mercedes-Benz of Chicago. Down payment. $80,000. Transaction 2. The Ritz-Carlton Residences. Security deposit. $50,000. That was for a penthouse. They were moving to a penthouse. Transaction 3. Serenity Maternity Spa. $5,000. That was the spa for Tiffany. I stared at that last one. $5,000 for massages and facials. I thought about the winter of 1982. I was working on a bridge project over the river. It was so cold that the sweat froze inside my hard hat. I worked 16 hours a day for 3 weeks straight just to save enough money to buy Lucas a decent bicycle for his birthday. I remembered how my hands had bled from the cold steel, and now that blood money was being used to rub lotion on the back of the woman who called me a liability. Transaction 4. Final wire transfer. $315,000. Recipient. Caldwell Miller joint account. He had taken it all. Every penny. He had not just kicked me out of my house. He had stripped me of my past, my present, and my future. He had planned this. The dinner, the spilled soup, the fight. It was all theater. They needed a reason to get me out of the house so they could enjoy the money without looking at my face. "Sir," the security guard set his hand firmly on my shoulder. "You need to calm down or you need to leave." I looked at the screen one last time. $0. 0 cents. I looked at Jennifer. She looked scared. I pulled my hand away from the guard. "I am leaving," I said. "I am leaving." I walked out of the bank. The sun was shining now, reflecting off the snow, blindingly bright. But I saw nothing but darkness. I stood on the sidewalk. People rushed past me in their expensive coats, talking on their phones, worrying about meetings and latte orders. They did not know that a man had just died right in front of them. The Henry Caldwell, who was a father, a provider, a man of substance, was dead. I reached into my pocket and felt the crumpled $20 bill Lucas had given me. This was it. This was my net worth. I laughed again. This time it wasn't a dry crackle. It was a low, deep sound that came from the bottom of my soul. It was the sound of a man who has nothing left to lose. Lucas thought he had won. He thought he had taken my power. But he forgot one thing. He forgot where he came from. He forgot that I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth like him. I was born in the mud. I knew how to fight in the mud. He had taken my money. He had taken my house. But he had made a fatal mistake. He had left me alive. I walked down the street clutching my trash bag. I was not going to a hotel. I was not going to a diner. I was going to war. And the first battle would be survival. I walked 5 miles to the office of Jeremiah Hartman. He was not just a lawyer. He was a man I had known since we were both young and hungry, fresh out of the army. He was the only person in this city I could trust not to judge me by the stains on my coat or the smell of the street that clung to me. His office was in a brownstone on the north side, a place that smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. When I walked in, his receptionist, a young girl who did not know me, reached for the phone to call security. I do not blame her. I caught a glimpse of myself in the brass mirror in the hallway. I looked like a ghost who had crawled out of a grave. My eyes were sunken, my skin was gray, and my clothes were torn. "Tell Mr. Hartman that Henry Caldwell is here," I rasped. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the dial. Just then, the door to the inner office opened. Jeremiah stepped out. He was 75, a little stooped, but his eyes were as sharp as a hawk's. He stopped when he saw me. He did not recoil. He did not gasp. He just walked over, put a hand on my shoulder, and looked into my eyes. "Come in, Henry," he said softly. He poured me a glass of whiskey. It burned going down, but it warmed the cold knot in my stomach. I told him everything. I told him about the soup. I told him about the eviction. I told him about the empty bank account. Jeremiah listened in silence. He did not interrupt. He just sat behind his massive mahogany desk, tapping a pen against a legal pad. When I finished, he did not offer empty platitudes. He turned to his computer. "Henry," he said, his voice grave, "if Lucas transferred that money using a power of attorney, there has to be a paper trail. Banks do not just hand over $500,000 because a son asks nicely. There has to be a trigger event, a medical declaration. He typed furiously for a few minutes. I watched his face. I saw his eyebrows knit together. I saw his jaw tighten. Then he stopped typing. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. It was fear. "Henry, you need to see this." He turned the monitor around. It was a court docket. A petition for guardianship. "Filed 3 days ago," Jeremiah read aloud. "Petitioner Lucas Caldwell. Subject Henry Caldwell. The petition claims that you have been diagnosed with level 3 dementia." "Dementia," I whispered. "I don't have dementia, Jeremiah. You know I don't. I just recited the structural load formula for a cantilever bridge to you 5 minutes ago." "Read the rest," Jeremiah said, pointing to a paragraph highlighted in red. I leaned in. The words swam before my eyes. "The subject has exhibited rapid cognitive decline resulting in severe paranoia and violent tendencies. The subject has physically attacked family members, including a pregnant woman. Immediate isolation is recommended for the safety of the subject and the community." I sat back stunned. Violent tendencies attacked a pregnant woman, the soup, I realized. The spilled soup, that was the attack. Jeremiah nodded slowly. "It was a setup, Henry. A meticulously planned legal execution. They provoked you. They waited for a tremor. They created a scene. And then they used that scene to justify an emergency ex parte order. That is how he got the power of attorney activated so quickly. He told the bank you were mentally incapacitated and dangerous. He didn't just steal your money. He stole your mind. In the eyes of the law, you are not Henry Caldwell, the engineer. You are Henry Caldwell, the dangerous lunatic." I felt a cold rage spreading through my veins. It was colder than the winter wind outside. "He legalized it," I said. "He made throwing his father into a snowstorm look like an act of public safety." "Precisely," Jeremiah said. "And if you go back there, or if the police find you wandering the streets in this condition, they will not take you home. They will take you to a state facility, a lockdown ward. Lucas has already signed the papers authorizing your commitment." I stared at the screen. My own son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I held when he cried over his first heartbreak. He had not just betrayed me. He had erased me. "We have to fight this," Jeremiah said, slamming his hand on the desk. "We will sue him. We will get independent medical evaluations. We will prove fraud. I will file an injunction tomorrow morning." "No," I said. Jeremiah looked at me surprised. "Henry, we cannot let him get away with this. This is criminal." "Look at me, Jeremiah," I said, gesturing to my rags. "Look at me. If we go to court tomorrow, who will the judge see? Will he see a victim, or will he see exactly what is in that file? An angry, disheveled, confused old man screaming about a conspiracy. Lucas is young. He is handsome. He has a pregnant wife who will cry on the stand and say she is terrified of me. He has the doctors on his payroll. He has the money. My money." Jeremiah opened his mouth to argue, but he closed it again. He knew I was right. In the court of law, perception is reality. And right now the reality was that I looked crazy. "So what do you want to do?" Jeremiah asked quietly. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city I had helped build. "I need to die," I said. "Henry, don't talk like that." "Not literally, Jeremiah." I turned back to him. "I need Henry Caldwell, the victim, to disappear. If I fight him now, I am playing his game on his turf. I will lose. He expects me to come back banging on the door. He expects me to get arrested. He is waiting for it." I took a deep breath. "I am going to vanish. Let them think I froze to death in an alley. Let them think I am rotting in a homeless shelter. Let them feel safe. Let them spend the money. Let them get comfortable. And then Jeremiah asked. And then I said, a grim smile touching my lips. When I have regained my strength, when I have built myself back up, when I have the power to crush him without saying a single word, then I will return, not as a father, but as a reckoning. Jeremiah looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. There is $5,000 in here cash, he said. It is not much. It is from my personal safe. Take it. It is a loan. I took the envelope. My hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't from nerves. It was from gratitude. I will pay you back, Jeremiah. With interest. I know you will, Henry, he said. You are the best engineer I know. You fix broken things. Now go fix yourself. I tucked the envelope into my coat pocket. It felt heavier than lead. It was not just money. It was a lifeline. I walked to the door. I paused and looked back at my old friend. One more thing, Jeremiah. Keep an eye on them. Don't engage. Just watch. I want to know everything. I will be your eyes, Henry. I walked out of the office and back into the cold. But the wind didn't bite as hard anymore. I had a plan. I had a secret. And most importantly, I had an enemy. Lucas thought he had buried me. But he forgot that I was a seed. He had buried me in the dirt, yes. But dirt is where things grow. Darkness is where roots take hold. I pulled my collar up. I headed toward the industrial district, toward the construction sites, where nobody asks questions, where strong backs are worth more than clean names. Henry Caldwell, the retired executive, was gone. In his place was a man with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The game had just begun. The next morning I found myself standing in the mud of a construction site on the south side of the city. It was a small residential project, a block of affordable apartments that was already 3 months behind schedule and bleeding money. The sign on the fence read, Miller Construction, but the paint was peeling and the phone number listed was disconnected. It was a graveyard of ambition, the kind of job site that smells of desperation and cut corners. I was not Henry Caldwell, the chief engineer here. I was just Henry, the old man who swept the floors and carried the scrap wood to the dumpster for $12 an hour under the table. I wore a second-hand pair of work boots I had bought at a thrift store with Jeremiah's money. They were a size too big and blistered my heels with every step, but I tied the laces tight and kept my head down. Hey, old man, move it or lose it. The voice cracked like a whip across the frozen air. It belonged to Brandon, the site foreman. He was 25 years old, had a face full of arrogance, and knew less about structural engineering than I knew about knitting. He wore a clean white hard hat that had never seen a speck of dust, while the rest of us were covered in grime. I was struggling with a wheelbarrow full of broken concrete. The wheel was rusted and stuck in the half-frozen mud. My back, which had once been strong enough to lift steel beams, was screaming in protest. The pain radiated from my lumbar spine down to my knees, but I gritted my teeth. I needed this job. I needed the cash to buy food. I needed the routine to keep from going insane. I am moving as fast as I can, Brandon, I muttered, pushing my weight against the handle. Well, your fast is not fast enough, he shouted, walking over and kicking the tire of my wheelbarrow. This is not a retirement home, Grandpa. We have a concrete pour scheduled for 2 o'clock, and this debris needs to be gone. If you cannot handle the weight, go sit on a park bench and feed the pigeons. The other workers laughed. They were young, strong men with tattoos on their necks and cigarettes hanging from their lips. They looked at me with pity or contempt. I was the cautionary tale. I was what they were afraid of becoming. I swallowed the rage that rose in my throat. It tasted like bile. 30 years ago, I would have fired a man like Brandon on the spot for disrespecting a crew member. I would have explained to him that a team is only as strong as its morale. But I was not the boss anymore. I was the lowest rung on the ladder. I am sorry, I said, forcing the words out. It won't happen again. I put my shoulder into the work and heaved the wheelbarrow forward. I spent the next 4 hours hauling rubble until my hands were raw and bleeding inside my gloves. My body was breaking, but my mind was alive. It was too alive. As I worked, I watched them. I watched how they tied the rebar. I watched how they mixed the mortar. And I saw the mistakes. They were small at first. A lap splice that was too short. A formwork that wasn't braced properly. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run over and tell them that gravity does not negotiate. But I kept my mouth shut. I was just the janitor. At noon, the whistle blew for lunch. The crew scattered to their trucks to eat sandwiches and smoke. The site fell silent. I walked over to the makeshift office, a plywood shack set up near the generator, to empty the trash bin. Inside the shack, it was warm. On the center table, a set of blueprints was spread out, held down by coffee mugs and a stapler. I should have just emptied the bin and left, but I could not do it. I am an engineer. It is not just what I do, it is who I am. Ink on paper calls to me. I walked over to the table. I wiped my dirty hands on my pants and leaned over the plans. It was the schematic for the second floor slab and the main support columns. I traced the lines with my eyes, calculating the loads in my head. Dead load, live load, wind shear. My eyes stopped on column C4. I frowned. I leaned closer. I checked the math again. Then I checked the material specifications list on the side of the page. My heart stopped. They were using number 4 rebar for a column that was supporting a cantilevered balcony. And the mix ratio for the concrete was standard 3,000 pounds per square inch. I did the calculation again in my head. It took me 3 seconds. If they poured that column today as planned, it would hold. It would hold for a week, maybe a month. But the moment they put furniture on that second floor, or the moment a heavy snowstorm hit the shear, stress would snap that column like a dry twig. The entire northeast corner of the building would collapse. People would die. I looked at the clock. The concrete trucks were arriving in an hour. I looked at the door. I could just walk away, let them fail, let Brandon take the fall. It was not my building. It was not my problem. But then I thought about the families who would move in here. Poor families. Families like mine used to be before I made my fortune. They would be sleeping in beds supported by a mathematical error. I could not let it happen. I looked around the desk. I found a red permanent marker. My hand was shaking, not from age this time, but from adrenaline. I uncapped the marker. It smelled of chemicals and authority. I drew a thick, angry red X right over column C4. Then, in the margin, I wrote in clear block capital letters, "Load calculation error. Shear stress exceeds capacity by 40%. Pouring this will cause catastrophic failure. Upgrade to number 6, rebar, and 5,000 PSS. I concrete immediately." I capped the marker. I felt a rush of power I had not felt in years. For 10 seconds, I was not a janitor. I was Henry Caldwell. "Hey, what do you think you are doing?" The door banged open. Brandon stood there, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand, his face twisting into a mask of fury. He saw me leaning over the table. He saw the red marker in my hand. He dropped his sandwich and stormed over, grabbing me by the collar of my dirty coat. "Are you out of your mind?" he screamed, spitting crumbs in my face. "You are drawing on the master plans. Do you know how much it costs to print these?" He shoved me back. I stumbled against a filing cabinet. "Brandon, listen to me," I said, my voice steady and hard. I was not pleading anymore. "That column is wrong. The math is wrong." "Math," he laughed, a cruel barking sound. "You think you know math? You are a garbage man, Henry. You pick up trash. You do not check engineering specs." He looked down at the paper. He saw the big red X. He saw the note. Catastrophic failure. He read, mocking my handwriting. Who do you think you are, Frank Lloyd Wright? He grabbed a rag and tried to wipe the marker off, but it was permanent. That just made him angrier. You ruined it, he yelled. You ruined the plans right before the inspector comes. He turned on me, his fists clenched. Get out, he hissed. Get your stuff and get off my site. You are fired, and do not expect a paycheck for this week because I am keeping it to pay for a new set of prints. I straightened my coat. I looked him right in the eye. I will leave, Brandon, but you need to read that note. If you pour that concrete today, you will kill someone. And when the forensic engineers come to investigate the collapse, they will find that the mistake was in the design, but the negligence was in the execution, and you will go to prison for manslaughter. Brandon laughed again, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was young, but he knew that prison was real. Get out, he screamed again, pointing at the door. I walked out of the shack. The cold wind hit me, but I held my head high. I was fired. I was broke again. I was back on the street. But for the first time in a week, I felt clean. I had done my job. I had protected the structure. I walked toward the gate, wondering where I would sleep tonight. Behind me, I heard Brandon cursing. Then I heard silence. I paused at the gate. I looked back. Through the window of the shack, I saw Brandon standing over the table. He was not wiping the plans anymore. He was staring at them. He was picking up a calculator. I smiled grimly and stepped out onto the sidewalk. I had planted the seed. Now I had to wait and see if it would grow or if the building would fall. I had not even made it to the bus stop when the ground beneath my feet shuddered. It was not an earthquake. It was a sound I knew too well, a sound that every engineer fears in the deepest part of their soul. It started with a high-pitched screech of shearing metal, followed by a deep, hollow boom that resonated in my chest. Then came the screams. I dropped my bag and turned around. A cloud of gray dust was rising from the northeast corner of the construction site, like a mushroom cloud. The scaffolding on the second floor had given way, taking a section of the freshly poured slab with it. I ran. My bad hip screamed in protest, but I forced my legs to move. I ran back through the open gate past the stunned security guard. The scene was pure chaos. Men were running in circles, shouting incoherently. The foreman, Brandon, was standing near the pile of rubble, his face pale as a sheet, staring at the destruction, with his mouth open. He was paralyzed by fear. Then a black pickup truck screeched onto the site tires, kicking up mud. A man jumped out. It was Mike Miller, the owner of the company. I recognized him from the company website I had researched at the library. He was a big man, but right now he looked small. He looked at the collapsed section, at the twisted rebar sticking out like broken ribs, and he put his hands on his head. "Oh God," he moaned. "I am finished. I am absolutely finished. The bank will pull the loan. We are done." No one was moving. No one was taking charge. The structure above the collapse was groaning. Another beam was buckling. If that beam went, the entire east wing would come down on top of the trapped equipment. I did not think. I stepped forward. I did not speak with the voice of a 72-year-old janitor. I spoke with the voice of the chief engineer of Caldwell Plaza. "Get the hydraulic jacks from the supply truck now," I bellowed. My voice cut through the panic like a foghorn. The men stopped running and looked at me. "Don't just stand there," I shouted, pointing at the crane operator. "Swing that boom around to the south elevation. We need to stabilize the main girder before the secondary supports fail. You with the red helmet, get everyone back 50 feet. Move." I don't know why they listened. Maybe it was the authority in my tone. Maybe it was because they were desperate for anyone to tell them what to do. But they moved. For the next 4 hours, I did not lift a finger, but I lifted that building. I stood in the mud, directing the crane, ordering the placement of emergency shoring columns, and calculating load redistributions in my head. I told them exactly where to place the jacks to relieve the stress. I told them which bolts to tighten and which ones to cut. By sunset, the building was stabilized. The collapse was contained. No one had died. I stood there wiping concrete dust from my face, my adrenaline finally fading, leaving me shaking and exhausted. Mike Miller walked over to me. He was covered in sweat and grime. He looked at me for a long time, trying to reconcile the old man in the torn coat with the commander who had just saved his company. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "I am the guy your foreman fired this morning for trying to warn him about the load calculation," I said, my voice raspy. Mike looked over at Brandon, who was sitting on a pile of lumberhead in his hands. Then he looked back at me. "You saved my ass," Mike said. "If that main girder had come down, I would be bankrupt by morning. You know structural engineering." "I know enough," I said. Mike took a deep breath. "Look, I don't know your story. I don't know why a guy with your skills is pushing a broom. But I know I need you. I am firing Brandon. I want you to run this site. I will pay you $30 an hour." "No 40. I laughed. It was a quiet, tired laugh. $40 an hour. It was a fortune compared to what I had yesterday, but it was peanuts compared to what I needed to destroy Lucas. "I don't want a job, Mike," I said. He looked confused. "What do you want, cash?" "I can give you a bonus." 5,000. I shook my head. I walked over to the hood of his truck and leaned against it. "Your company is in trouble, Mike. I saw the books in the trailer. You are over-leveraged. Your projects are behind schedule. You are bleeding cash because of incompetence and bad design. This collapse is just a symptom of a sickness." Mike stiffened. "How do you know about the books?" I ignored the question. "I can fix it," I said. "I can value engineer every project you have. I can cut your material costs by 15% without sacrificing safety. I can get this building finished in 3 weeks. But I don't want a wage." I looked him dead in the eye. "I want 5% equity in this project. And I want 5% of every project I touch from now on." Mike laughed nervously. "You are crazy. You want equity. You are a homeless guy." "I am the guy who just saved you from a multi-million-dollar lawsuit," I reminded him. "And I am the only one who can get this mess past the city inspectors next week. You can keep your $40 an hour and go bankrupt, or you can give me a piece of the pie and become the biggest developer in the South Side." Mike stared at me. He looked at the stabilized building. He looked at his shaking hands. He was a gambler, and he knew he had no cards left to play. He stuck out his hand. "Deal. But I need to know your name." "Henry," I said, gripping his hand with a strength that surprised him. "Just Henry. And one more thing. My name stays off the books. I am a silent partner. Create a holding company. Call it HC Holdings. That is who you pay." That handshake was the beginning of the resurrection. For the next 3 years, I worked like a demon. I did not sleep. I ate, breathed, and drank concrete and steel. I took Miller Construction from a failing small-time outfit to a mid-sized powerhouse. We took on the projects nobody else wanted, the condemned warehouses, the sinking foundations, and we turned them into gold. I used every trick I had learned in 40 years. I negotiated steel prices down to the penny. I redesigned foundations to be more efficient. I spotted legal loopholes in zoning laws that allowed us to build higher and wider. And I stayed in the shadows. I was the ghost in the machine. To the workers, I was just the old consultant who showed up in a black car, pointed at a problem, and left. To the city, I did not exist. But my bank account existed. The 5% started to add up. First it was 50,000, then 200,000, then 1,000,000. I did not spend it on cars. I did not spend it on women. I bought a modest apartment in a secure building. I bought good suits, and I bought information. Every month I received a report from the private investigator I had hired to watch Lucas and Tiffany. I watched as Lucas ran his restaurant into the ground. I watched as Tiffany spent my life savings on vacations to the Maldives and private nannies. I watched them burn through $450,000 in less than 2 years. I watched them refinance the house. Then I watched them take out a second mortgage. I was not just building a construction company. I was building a trap. Every dollar I earned was a brick in the wall that would eventually crush them. By the third year, I had accumulated enough capital to start buying debt. I bought the distressed mortgages of properties around the city. I became the bank. One afternoon, Mike walked into my office. He was wearing an Armani suit, now looking prosperous and happy. "Henry," he said, pouring himself a drink, "we just landed the contract for the harbor redevelopment. We are big time now. You know, people keep asking me who my secret weapon is. They say Miller Construction has a Midas touch." I swiveled my chair around. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit tailored to hide the slight hunch in my shoulders. My hands didn't shake anymore. "Let them wonder, Mike," I said. "Mystery is power." Mike sat down. "You know, you never told me why you do it. You have enough money now to retire for real. You could buy a yacht. Go to Florida. Why are you still here working 18 hours a day in the dark?" I picked up a file from my desk. It was the latest report on Lucas. He was 3 months behind on his mortgage payments. The bank was threatening foreclosure. "I am not working for money, Mike," I said, closing the file. "I am working for justice. And justice is expensive." I looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there in the penthouse I had paid for my son was probably drinking wine and complaining about the economy, unaware that the landlord, the bank, and the executioner were all the same person, and he was coming for dinner. "Get the paperwork ready for the acquisition of the bad debts in the Lincoln Park district," I told Mike. He looked at me surprised. "Lincoln Park, that is residential. We don't do residential debt." "We do now," I said, a cold smile playing on my lips. "There is a specific property I have my eye on. It has a lot of sentimental value." Mike didn't ask any more questions. He knew better. He just nodded and left the room. I sat alone in the silence. I touched the picture of Catherine that sat on my desk now in a silver frame. "It won't be long now," I whispered to her. "The foundation is laid. The trap is set. Now we just wait for the rats to get hungry." 4 years is a long time. In the world of construction, it is enough time to tear down a stadium and build a skyscraper in its place. In the world of finance, it is enough time to turn a pauper into a king. And in my world, it was enough time to turn a broken old man into a ghost. I sat in my apartment on the 45th floor of a building I now owned through a shell company. The lights were off. The only illumination came from the bank of high-definition monitors lining the wall. This was my command center. This was where I lived. I was wealthy again. Wealthier than I had ever been in my previous life. My hands were smooth now, the calluses gone softened by expensive lotions and the absence of manual labor. But my heart had hardened. It was like concrete that had set too fast, brittle and cold. On the desk in front of me lay a manila envelope. It arrived every month like clockwork from the private investigator I employed. His name was Slater, an ex-police detective who did not ask questions as long as the checks cleared. Usually these envelopes contained bank statements, credit card receipts, files, and photos of Lucas and Tiffany entering expensive restaurants or leaving luxury boutiques. But today the envelope was thicker. Slater had sent me something new. He had hacked into the smart home system of the house on Lincoln Park. The house that used to be mine. The house I had paid for with my blood and sweat. I opened the file on my computer and linked it to the feed Slater had provided. The screens on my wall flickered to life. I was looking inside my old home. The resolution was crystal clear. There was the living room redecorated in cold whites and grays, looking more like a museum than a home. There was the kitchen, spotless and unused. And then I saw the nursery. Or rather, the room that should have been a nursery. My heart hammered against my ribs. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. In the center of the room, sitting on a plush, expensive rug, was a small boy. Leo. He was 4 years old. My grandson. The child I had never met. The child whose existence was used as the excuse to throw me out into the snow. I watched him, and as I watched, a cold dread began to pool in my stomach. Leo was not playing. There were toys everywhere. Expensive educational toys imported from Europe. Wooden trains, electronic learning pads, plush animals. They were scattered around him like debris. But Leo was just sitting there. He was rocking back and forth. A slow, rhythmic motion, forward and back, forward and back. He was holding an iPad. The blue light from the screen washed over his pale face, making him look like a ghost. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't laughing. He was just staring, his little thumb swiping mechanically. I checked the timestamp on the video feed. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Where was Tiffany? I switched cameras. I found her in the master bedroom. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror, wearing a glittering evening gown. A makeup artist was applying powder to her face. A stylist was adjusting her hair. I turned up the volume on the feed. "You have to make me look younger," Tiffany was saying, her voice shrill. "This charity gala is important. The press will be there. I need to look like the devoted mother of the year." Devoted mother. I looked back at the screen showing Leo. He was still rocking. I switched another camera. I found Lucas. He wasn't even in the house. I checked the GPS tracker report Slater had included. Lucas was at the country club. He had been there since 9 in the morning. The report noted that he was playing 18 holes with a group of investors he was trying to impress with money he didn't have. I went back to Leo. The door to his room was closed. I zoomed in. It wasn't just closed. There was a latch on the outside. They locked him in. My hand formed a fist on the desk. They locked a 4-year-old child in a room so he wouldn't disturb them. I watched for an hour. No one came in. The nanny, a woman I didn't recognize, walked past the door twice but didn't stop. She was on her phone laughing with a boyfriend. Leo finally put the iPad down. He stood up. He was small for his age. Too small. His arms were thin, his skin pasty from a lack of sunlight. He walked over to the window and looked out. He pressed his hand against the glass. He didn't cry. That was the worst part. A healthy child cries when he is lonely. A healthy child screams for his mother. Leo was silent. He had learned that screaming did not work. He had learned the same lesson I had learned that night in the snow, that his voice did not matter to the people who were supposed to love him. I saw him trace a shape on the foggy glass. It looked like a bridge. Tears pricked my eyes. It was instinct. It was in his blood. He was a builder just like me. He was trapped in a golden cage surrounded by plastic junk reaching out for something solid. Then the door opened. Tiffany breezed in. She was fully dressed for her gala. She didn't hug him. She didn't pick him up. She held out a phone and snapped a selfie with him in the background. "Smile, Leo," she snapped. "Look happy. Mommy does not have time for your moods." Leo didn't look up. He didn't even acknowledge her presence. He just went back to rocking. Tiffany rolled her eyes. She typed something on her phone, probably a caption about how much she loved her little angel, and then she turned around and walked out. She locked the door again. I sat back in my chair, trembling. But this was not the trembling of an old man. This was the trembling of a volcano about to erupt. I had waited 4 years. I had told myself I was waiting for the perfect financial moment. I was waiting for interest rates to shift. I was waiting for their debt to mature. But that was a lie. I had been waiting because I was afraid. I was afraid to face them. I was afraid that seeing them would hurt too much. But seeing Leo hurt more. They were not just spending my money. They were not just living in my house. They were murdering a soul. They had called me a liability because I was old. But they were the liabilities. They were toxic waste. They were poisoning the future of my family. If I let this continue, Leo would not survive. He would grow up broken, or he wouldn't grow up at all. I looked at the boy on the screen. He was me. He was the part of me that was innocent and trusting, trapped in a cold room. I reached for the phone. I dialed Mike's number. Henry Mike answered. "It is late." "Is everything okay?" "No, Mike," I said. My voice was low, devoid of any emotion except cold resolve. "Nothing is okay. But it is about to be." "I want you to call the bank," I said. "I want to execute the purchase of the Lincoln Park debt. Tonight." "Tonight," Mike stammered. "Henry, that is a complicated deal. We need to do due diligence. We need to—" I said tonight, I roared. I slammed my hand on the desk. "Buy it all. The mortgage, the business loans, the credit card debt, everything. Pay whatever premium they ask. I want to own every single dollar that Lucas Caldwell owes." There was a silence on the other end. Mike had never heard me yell. "Okay, Henry. Okay, I will make the calls." "And Mike," I added, my voice dropping back to a whisper, "get the lawyers ready. I am not just foreclosing on a house. I am foreclosing on a family." I hung up the phone. I looked at Leo one last time. "Hang on, little one," I whispered to the screen. "Grandpa is coming." I stood up and walked to the closet. I pulled out my suit. The black one. The one I wore for funerals. Because that is what this was. It was the funeral of Lucas and Tiffany's comfortable, selfish life. I was done hiding in the shadows. I was done being the silent partner. They wanted a ghost, fine. I would be the ghost that haunted them until they had nothing left. I walked out of my apartment and into the elevator. The numbers ticked down. 40, 30, 20, 10, ground floor. The doors opened. I stepped out into the night. The air was crisp just like it had been 4 years ago. But this time I wasn't walking into the cold. I was bringing the storm with me. I watched the collapse of my son's life through the lens of a high-definition camera, and I felt nothing but a cold, grim satisfaction. It was a Tuesday evening, typically a busy time for the restaurant industry in Chicago. But the Gilded Fork Lucas's vanity project was as silent as a tomb. I read the financial reports on my desk while monitoring the live feed from the restaurant's security system. The place was hemorrhaging money. The imported marble floors, the crystal chandeliers the chef poached from Paris, it was all a facade. The food was mediocre, the service was pretentious, and the reviews were scathing. Lucas had tried to buy prestige, but he had forgotten that reputation is earned, not purchased. On the screen, I saw Lucas sitting at the bar, his head in his hands. He was drinking whiskey from the top shelf, counting the empty tables. There were only 2 couples in the entire dining room, and one of them was sending their steak back. He looked older. The boyish charm was gone, replaced by the puffy, red-faced look of a man who is drinking to forget that he is a failure. His phone rang. He looked at the screen, grimaced, and let it go to voicemail. I knew who it was. It was the bank. I had instructed my holding company to acquire his primary mortgage 2 weeks ago. Now I held the paper on the house he had stolen from me. And this morning I had instructed my lawyers to send the notice of default. The scene shifted to the house. I switched feeds to the living room camera. Tiffany was there, surrounded by orange Hermes boxes. She was unboxing a new handbag, holding it up to the light, admiring the grain of the leather. She looked manic, her eyes bright with the dopamine hit of spending money she did not have. The front door slammed. Lucas stormed in. He didn't even take off his coat. He marched into the living room and threw a thick envelope onto the coffee table right on top of a silk scarf Tiffany had just unwrapped. "What is this?" Tiffany asked, annoyed. "You are wrinkling the silk, Lucas." "It is a foreclosure notice," Tiffany. Lucas screamed. His voice cracked. It was the sound of a man who has reached his breaking point. "The bank is taking the house. They are giving us 30 days to vacate." 30 days. Tiffany laughed. It was a high, brittle sound. "Don't be dramatic. Just call your dad's old banker friends. Write a check. Fix it. That is what you do, write a check." Lucas stared at her, his eyes bulging. "With what money?" "There is no money left. You spent the last $10,000 on this." He gestured wildly at the orange boxes. "We haven't paid the vendors for the restaurant in 3 months. The staff is threatening to walk out. And you are buying handbags." Tiffany stood up, her face twisting into a sneer. "Don't you dare blame this on me, Lucas. I have to maintain an image. I am the face of this family. If I look, poor people will think we are poor. And whose fault is that, who insisted on opening a restaurant? He had no idea how to run. I ran it fine until the market turned." Lucas defended himself, weak as ever. "You ran it into the ground," Tiffany yelled, stepping closer to him. "You are useless, Lucas. You are a weak, pathetic little man who thought he could play businessman with his daddy's money. Well, daddy is gone, isn't he? And without him to hold your hand, you are nothing." I watched from my office, sipping my coffee. She was right, of course. Cruel, but right. "I am nothing," Lucas spat back. "You are the one who told me to kick him out. You are the one who said he was a liability." "And he was," Tiffany shrieked. "But at least he knew how to make money. You just know how to lose it." God! I should have married that hedge fund guy when I had the chance. Lucas looked like he was going to hit her. He raised a hand, then dropped it, defeated. He slumped onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "What are we going to do?" he moaned. "We are going to be on the street." Tiffany didn't offer comfort. She just picked up her new bag and started putting it back in the box. "Figure it out, Lucas. Or I am taking Leo and going to my mother's." The threat hung in the air. The same threat she had used against me. This was the moment. They were broken. They were desperate. They were ready. I picked up my phone and dialed Jeremiah Hartman. "It is time," I said. "Go in." Half an hour later, the doorbell rang at the Lincoln Park house. Lucas and Tiffany were still in the living room, sitting in sullen silence. Lucas wiped his face and went to answer it. Standing on the porch was Jeremiah Hartman. He looked every inch the distinguished, high-powered attorney. He wore a 3-piece suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than Lucas's car. Lucas blinked, confused. "Mr. Hartman." "My father's lawyer, Mr. Caldwell." Jeremiah said, his voice smooth and professional. "Good evening. I apologize for the intrusion, but I come with a rather urgent proposition. May I come in?" Lucas hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in, we were just discussing some business." Jeremiah walked into the living room. He looked around with a critical eye, taking in the expensive furniture and the tension in the air. Tiffany stood up, smoothing her dress, her survival instinct kicking in instantly. She smelled money. "Mr. Hartman, what a surprise," she said, putting on her fake socialite smile. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" Jeremiah didn't smile back. He placed his briefcase on the table, pushing aside the foreclosure notice as if it were a piece of trash. "I am not here representing your father," Jeremiah said. "As you know, I haven't seen Henry in years. I am here representing a private equity firm called Phoenix Rising." "Phoenix Rising?" Lucas asked. "I have never heard of them." "They are very discreet," Jeremiah said. "They specialize in distressed assets. They buy failing businesses and bad debt." Lucas bristled. "Failing businesses." "Mr. Caldwell, let us be frank," Jeremiah said, opening the briefcase and pulling out a file. "I know about the foreclosure. I know about the restaurant's negative cash flow. I know you are about 48 hours away from declaring bankruptcy. Lucas turned pale. How? How do you know that? My clients are thorough, Jeremiah said. They see value in your restaurant's location. And they see value in this property. They are willing to make you an offer. He slid a contract across the table. What kind of offer? Tiffany asked, leaning forward, her eyes greedy. Phoenix Rising will purchase all of your outstanding debt, Jeremiah explained. The mortgage, the business loans, the personal credit lines. Everything. We will consolidate it into a single loan with our firm. We will also inject $2 million of fresh capital into the restaurant to clear your vendor debts and rebrand. $2 million, Lucas whispered. He looked like a drowning man who had just been thrown a life raft. What is the catch? Tiffany asked sharply. Jeremiah smiled. It was a shark's smile. The terms are strict. You will sign over the deed to this house and the ownership of the restaurant as collateral. You will remain as the operating managers, but Phoenix Rising will hold the controlling interest. If you fail to meet the repayment schedule, or if the profit margins do not hit 15% within 6 months, we invoke the default clause. What is the default clause? Lucas asked, picking up the paper. Total liquidation, Jeremiah said calmly. We take everything. Immediate eviction, no recourse. Lucas swallowed hard. That is risky. It is a lifeline, Mr. Caldwell, Jeremiah said, standing up. You have no other options. The bank takes the house in 30 days. My clients are offering you a chance to keep your lifestyle, to keep your reputation. Jeremiah looked at his watch. The offer expires at midnight. My clients do not like to wait. Lucas looked at Tiffany. Tiffany looked at the Hermes box, then at the foreclosure notice. Sign it, she hissed. But Tiffany, if we miss a payment, Lucas started. We won't miss a payment, she snapped. With $2 million, we can fix the restaurant. We can do marketing. We can hire a celebrity chef. Just sign the damn paper, Lucas. Do you want to be homeless? Lucas looked at the pen. He looked at the contract. He didn't read the fine print. He didn't ask who was behind Phoenix Rising. He just saw the zeros. He saw the easy way out. He picked up the pen. I held my breath in my office. He signed. Then he passed the pen to Tiffany. She signed with a flourish. Jeremiah took the papers back, checked the signatures, and placed them in his briefcase. Excellent decision, he said. The funds will be wired tomorrow morning. He walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back. Oh, one more thing. The chairman of Phoenix Rising likes to be involved. He will be stopping by to inspect his investment soon. I suggest you have the restaurant in top shape. We will, Tiffany said, beaming. We will make him proud. Jeremiah nodded and walked out into the night. I watched them on the screen. Lucas poured himself another drink, his hands shaking, but this time with relief. Tiffany hugged him. We did it, she squealed. We are rich again. I leaned back in my chair. They weren't rich. They were owned. They had just signed a deal with the devil, but they didn't know that the devil was the man they had left in the snow. The trap was shut. Now I just had to wait for the perfect moment to snap it tight. The final act was about to begin. The morning sun sliced through the blinds of Lucas's office, casting long prison bar shadows across the mahogany desk he could no longer afford to polish. I watched the scene unfold from my monitors, sipping coffee that tasted like victory. Lucas was trying so hard to play the part of the misunderstood genius. He had put on his best suit, the navy one I had bought him for his graduation, but it hung loosely on his frame now. Stress is a cruel tailor. He had arranged files on his desk to look busy, but I knew those folders were empty. The only thing of substance in that room was the fear radiating off him in waves. Tiffany sat next to him, her posture rigid. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, likely to hide the puffiness from a night spent crying over her potential loss of status. When Jeremiah Hartman walked in, the air in the room changed. Jeremiah did not just enter a room. He occupied it. He placed his leather briefcase on the table with a heavy, confident thud that sounded like a judge's gavel. Lucas stood up, extending a hand that I could see was trembling. "Mr. Hartman, thank you for coming. We have been reviewing our options, and while we have several interested parties, we decided to hear you out." It was a pathetic lie. There were no other parties. There was only the abyss, and Jeremiah was the only one offering a rope. Jeremiah ignored the hand. He sat down and opened the briefcase. The click of the latches was deafening in the silent room. He slid a thick document across the table. It was bound in blue legal paper. It looked innocent enough, but I knew it was a death warrant for their freedom. "Let us cut to the chase, Mr. Caldwell," Jeremiah said, his voice smooth as velvet and cold as ice. "My clients, Phoenix Rising, are not interested in your potential. They are interested in your assets. They are willing to inject $2 million into your accounts by close of business today. That clears your mortgage arrears, pays your vendors, and gives you operating capital for 6 months." I saw Tiffany's head snap up. $2 million. I could practically hear the calculator clicking in her brain. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were hungry. But Jeremiah continued, leaning forward. "There are conditions, significant ones." Lucas picked up the document. He started to read, his eyes darting back and forth. "What kind of conditions?" Jeremiah clasped his hands. "First, we require a full lien on all personal and business property. The house, the restaurant, the cars, the jewelry, everything. If you default, we do not go to court. We simply take possession. Second, and this is non-negotiable, Phoenix Rising assumes 51% controlling interest in the restaurant's board. You remain the face of the company, but we pull the strings." Lucas frowned. "So I would be an employee in my own restaurant?" "You would be a solvent employee," Jeremiah corrected him, "which is better than being a bankrupt owner." Lucas flipped the page. He stopped. His finger traced a paragraph near the bottom. I watched on the high-definition feed as he read the clause I had personally drafted. Paragraph 14. The Child Welfare and Financial Stability Clause. "What is this?" Lucas asked, his voice shaking. "It says here that in the event of financial insolvency or default, the creditors reserve the right to petition for immediate temporary guardianship of any minors residing in the foreclosed property, citing inability to provide a stable environment." He looked up at Jeremiah. "You want rights to my son? You want rights to Leo?" Jeremiah didn't blink. "It is a standard protection clause for high-risk loans, Mr. Caldwell. My clients want to ensure that their investment does not suffer from negative press. A homeless child is bad for business. If you cannot provide a home for your son because you have lost everything, my clients have the resources to place him in a private boarding facility until you are back on your feet. It is an act of charity, really." Lucas slammed the contract down. "This is insane. I am not signing away custody of my son for a loan. This is predatory." He stood up, looking for a moment like the man I wished he had been 5 years ago. He had a spark of spine. He looked at Tiffany. "We can't sign this, Tiff. It is too dangerous. If the restaurant fails, we lose Leo." I leaned forward in my chair. This was the test. Would he choose his son, or would he choose the money? But I had underestimated the depth of Tiffany's greed. She reached out and grabbed Lucas's arm. Her nails dug into his suit jacket. "Sit down, Lucas," she hissed. "No, Tiffany." "Read it," Lucas pleaded. "They could take Leo." "They won't take Leo because we won't fail," Tiffany argued, her voice rising to a shriek. She turned to Jeremiah, flashing a desperate smile. "Ignore him. He is just stressed. Mr. Hartman, tell him. This is just a formality, right? Just legal jargon." Jeremiah nodded slowly. "It is a worst-case scenario provision. Mrs. Caldwell. If you are confident in your ability to turn the business around with our $2 million, then you have nothing to fear. The clause only triggers if you lose everything. Tiffany turned back to Lucas. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Lucas, listen to me. We have no money. The bank comes tomorrow. Do you want Leo to live on the street? Do you want him to grow up in a shelter? Because that is what will happen if you don't sign this. This money saves us. It saves Leo. But the terms, Lucas whispered, tears welling in his eyes. It feels like a trap. It is not a trap, it is a business deal, Tiffany yelled. $2 million, Lucas, you can hire the best marketing team. We can fix this. You said you were a genius chef, didn't you? Prove it. Sign the paper and save our family. Or are you a coward? Lucas looked at her. He looked at the contract. Then he looked at the picture of Leo on his desk. He was trapped between a rock and a hard place, and he was too weak to climb out. He slumped back into his chair. The fight went out of him. He was not a father protecting his cub. He was a defeated man looking for an easy way out. Where do I sign? He asked, his voice barely audible. Jeremiah produced a gold fountain pen. It was heavy, expensive, and filled with black ink. He pointed to the line at the bottom of the last page. Right there, Mr. Caldwell. And initial the custody clause, please, to show you understand the risks. Lucas took the pen. His hand hovered over the paper for a long second. In that second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the snow. I remembered the soup. I remembered Leo rocking back and forth in a locked room. Lucas signed. He scrawled his name in a shaky, jagged line. Then he initialed the clause that would eventually allow me to save my grandson. Tiffany snatched the pen from him before the ink was even dry. She signed her name with a flourish, a big looping signature that screamed of arrogance. She looked at Jeremiah and smiled. When does the money hit the account? She asked. Within the hour, Jeremiah said, closing the briefcase. He stood up, looking at them with the expression of an undertaker who has just measured a body for a coffin. Gentlemen, Mrs. Caldwell, he said. Welcome to the Phoenix Rising family. We expect great things from you. He walked out. Lucas put his head on the desk. Tiffany immediately pulled out her phone, probably to call the Hermes store and tell them she was coming back. I sat in the dark watching them. They thought they had just been saved. They thought the $2 million was a blessing. They did not know it was the rope they would use to hang themselves. I reached for my phone and sent a text to Mike at the construction site. The deal is done. Initiate Phase 2. Phase 2 was simple. It was the demolition. Not of a building, but of their hope. I was going to make sure that restaurant failed. I was going to make sure that 15% profit margin was mathematically impossible. And when the 6 months were up, I would be waiting at the door, not with a checkbook, but with the eviction notice. Lucas had signed his name on the line, but he had signed his soul over to me. The negotiations were over. Now the punishment would begin. The ink was barely dry on the paper when Lucas leaned back in his leather chair and let out a laugh that echoed through the empty office. It was a sound I knew well. It was the laugh of a man who thinks he has gotten away with murder. He picked up the heavy contract, the document that effectively signed his life over to me, and waved it in the air like a flag of victory. Can you believe it, Tiffany? He said, his voice dripping with arrogance. They actually bought it. They just handed us $2 million. Tiffany was already on her phone checking the banking app every 3 seconds. Her face was pale with anticipation. Are you sure, Lucas? She asked. Are you sure they are not going to check the books again? Lucas scoffed. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city he thought he owned. These investors are idiots, Tiffany. Complete amateurs. They did not even ask for a forensic audit. They just looked at the location and the brand potential. They are throwing money into a bottomless pit. He turned back to her, a smirk playing on his lips. Do they really think we can turn a 15% profit in 6 months? The restaurant is dead weight, but who cares? By the time they figure out we are cooking the books to look solvent, we will have funneled enough cash into offshore accounts to retire in the Cayman Islands. We just need to play the game for a few months. I sat in my darkened office, gripping the armrests of my chair. My own son. He was not just incompetent. He was a thief. He was planning to defraud the very people who had just saved him. He called me stupid. He called my holding company amateurs. He had no idea that the bottomless pit he was laughing about was actually a grave, and he was digging it deeper with every word. Suddenly, Tiffany screamed. It was a high-pitched shriek of pure ecstasy. "It is here, Lucas. The money is here." She turned the phone screen toward him. I zoomed in with the camera. The balance on their joint account had jumped from negative $4,000 to $1,996,000. Lucas let out a whoop of joy. He grabbed Tiffany and spun her around. They laughed. They jumped up and down like children who had found a hidden jar of candy. They did not hug each other out of love. They hugged the money. They were embracing their salvation, never realizing it was actually their severance package. "We are back, baby," Lucas shouted. "We are untouchable." Tiffany pulled away, her eyes gleaming with a manic light. She was already spending the money in her head. "We need to celebrate," she said. "We need to show everyone. The Joneses, the Millers, all those people who stopped inviting us to dinner when the rumors started. We need to rub this in their faces." Lucas nodded vigorously. "Yes. A party. Not just a dinner, a gala. We will host it at the house. We will hire the best catering. We will get the vintage champagne. We want everyone to see that the Caldwells are not out of the game. And we will invite the investor," Tiffany added. "That lawyer, Mr. Hartman." Lucas paused. "Hartman, why to show him we are confident?" Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If he sees us living the high life surrounded by important people, he will trust us more. He will think we are successful. It is all about optics, Lucas. Fake it until you make it." I shook my head. Fake it until you break it. They spent the next 3 hours planning the party. I watched as they burned through $50,000 in a single afternoon. They hired a string quartet. They ordered cases of Dom Perignon. They hired a florist to fill the house with white lilies. It was grotesque. They were using borrowed money that came with a guillotine blade attached to throw a party for people who did not care about them. Lucas picked up the phone and called Jeremiah Hartman. I could hear his voice, smooth and overly confident. "Mr. Hartman, this is Lucas. Yes, we received the funds. We are incredibly grateful for the partnership. In fact, we are hosting a small gathering at our estate this Saturday to celebrate the new venture. We would be honored if you could attend. Perhaps the chairman of Phoenix Rising could join us as well." I watched Lucas listen to the response. He smiled. "Excellent. We look forward to seeing you." He hung up and turned to Tiffany. "Hartman is coming. He said the chairman might stop by later in the evening to inspect the investment." Tiffany clapped her hands. "Perfect. We will dazzle him. By the time he leaves, he will be begging to give us another $1,000,000. Saturday arrived. The weather was crisp and clear, a perfect autumn evening in Chicago. I sat in my car parked down the street from my old house. I watched the valet parking attendants line up the luxury cars. I saw the guests arriving in their furs and tuxedos. These were the fair-weather friends who had abandoned Lucas when he was struggling, now back like moths to a flame because they smelled cash. I watched the feed from inside the house. It was transformed. The lilies covered the smell of desperation. The champagne flowed like water. Lucas was holding court in the center of the living room, wearing a new tuxedo, a glass of scotch in his hand. He was laughing too loudly. He was telling stories about his business acumen, about how he had secured a strategic partnership because of his visionary leadership. Tiffany was gliding through the room in a silver dress that cost more than my first car. She was showing off her new diamond earrings, telling the wives of bankers that she had just been too busy to socialize lately because they were expanding the empire. It was a theater of the absurd, a room full of lies funded by a man they thought was dead. I checked my watch. It was 9 o'clock. The party was in full swing. The guests were drunk and happy. Lucas and Tiffany felt invincible. It was time. I picked up my phone and called Jeremiah, who was already inside the party. I saw him on the camera. He was standing in the corner, sipping sparkling water, observing the excess with a look of distaste. He felt his phone buzz. He looked at it, then looked directly into the security camera hidden in the molding. He nodded imperceptibly. I started the engine of my car. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, black as midnight. I had bought it cash a month ago. It was the kind of car that commanded silence. I drove slowly down the street. I pulled up to the front of the house, bypassing the valet. The attendants rushed over, but I ignored them. I stepped out of the car. I adjusted my silk tie. I smoothed the lapels of my Italian suit. I looked at the house. My house. The windows were glowing with golden light. I could hear the music and the laughter spilling out onto the lawn. They were celebrating their victory. They were celebrating their cleverness. They were laughing at the stupid investors. I walked up the stone path. The same path I had shoveled snow from for 30 years. The same path where Lucas had pushed me out into the cold. The security guard at the door tried to stop me. "Excuse me, sir, this is a private event. May I see your invitation?" I looked at him. I did not raise my voice. I simply projected the aura of a man who owns the pavement he stands on. "I do not need an invitation," I said. "I own the mortgage." The guard hesitated. He saw the car. He saw the suit. He saw the eyes that had seen everything. He stepped aside. I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The noise of the party hit me. The smell of expensive perfume and roasted duck. I stood in the foyer for a moment, unseen. I watched my son. He was standing on a chair now, raising a toast. To the future, Lucas shouted, his face flushed with alcohol and pride. To the Caldwell Empire, and to the mysterious investors who know a winner when they see one. The crowd cheered. Tiffany laughed, throwing her head back. I stepped into the light. "Enjoy the champagne, Lucas," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a razor blade. "It cost you everything." The jazz band was playing a soft melodic tune that floated through the humid air of the ballroom, mixing with the clinking of crystal flutes and the murmur of polite, wealthy conversation. The room smelled of expensive lilies and even more expensive perfume. It was a smell I knew well, the scent of money trying to mask the scent of desperation. I stood in the shadows of the foyer for a moment longer, just watching. In the center of the room, standing on a slightly raised platform near the grand piano, was my son. Lucas held a microphone in one hand and a glass of vintage champagne in the other. He looked the part. His tuxedo was tailored, his hair was perfectly coiffed, and his smile was dazzling. But I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. I could see the way his eyes darted around the room, seeking validation, seeking approval from the predators he had invited into his home. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas said, his voice amplified by the speakers, "thank you all for coming tonight. When I look around this room, I do not just see friends and colleagues. I see believers. You are the people who believed in the vision of the Caldwell Empire when the clouds were dark." He paused for dramatic effect. The crowd rippled with polite applause. Tiffany, standing next to him in her shimmering silver dress, beamed like a beauty queen. She placed a possessive hand on his arm. "Building something from nothing is not easy." Lucas continued, puffing out his chest. "It takes grit. It takes determination. There were nights when I didn't know if we would make payroll. There were days when the market turned against us. But I never gave up. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps because that is what a Caldwell does. We do not rely on handouts. We rely on hard work and self-made success. I almost laughed out loud. Self-made. The only thing Lucas had ever made by himself was a mess. Tonight, Lucas announced, raising his glass higher, we celebrate a new chapter. A partnership with Phoenix Rising that validates everything we have built. To success, to resilience, and to the future which belongs to those bold enough to seize it. To the future, the crowd echoed. They drank. Lucas downed his champagne in one gulp and reached for another. He was high on the lie. He actually believed it. He had rewritten history in his head so thoroughly that he had forgotten the father he buried in the snow to get there. That was the moment I chose to move. Outside, the heavy engine of the Rolls-Royce Phantom had fallen silent, but its presence was still felt. The headlights cut through the darkness of the driveway. The chauffeur, a man I hired for his intimidating size as much as his driving skills, opened the heavy oak double doors of the house wide. A gust of cool night air swept into the warm room, causing the candle flames to flicker and dance. The jazz band faltered, missing a beat, then stopped altogether as heads turned toward the entrance. I stepped across the threshold. I was not wearing the torn parka and the stained trousers from 5 years ago. I was wearing a black bespoke suit from Savile Row, cut from wool so fine it absorbed the light. My shirt was crisp white silk. My shoes were polished Italian leather that clicked rhythmically against the marble floor I had laid myself. My hair was silver now, completely white, but it was groomed to perfection. I did not walk with the shuffle of a broken old man. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a titan. I carried a cane not because I needed it, but because it was a weapon. It was made of ebony with a silver handle in the shape of a lion's head. The silence in the room was absolute. It started at the door and rolled forward like a wave until it reached the stage. One by one, the guests parted. They did not know who I was, but they knew power when they saw it. They sensed the gravity that pulled the air out of the room. They stepped back, creating a wide path that led straight to my son. Lucas was bringing the glass to his lips when he saw the movement in the crowd. He squinted against the stage lights. He looked annoyed that his moment was being interrupted. Then he saw me. The glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor with a sharp, violent shatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Champagne splashed onto his polished shoes, but he didn't move. He couldn't move. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he was seeing a ghost, and in a way he was. Tiffany, who had been busy posing for a photographer, turned around to see what had happened. She looked at Lucas, then followed his gaze to the back of the room. Her reaction was different. She didn't see the suit. She didn't see the car. She didn't see the power. Her brain was stuck in the past. She only saw the man she hated. She saw the liability. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She stepped forward to the edge of the platform, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You!" she shrieked. Her voice cracked, destroying the elegant atmosphere instantly. "What are you doing here?" The crowd gasped. They looked from her to me, confused. Tiffany did not lower her voice. She was fueled by champagne and adrenaline. "Security," she screamed. "Where is security? Why did you let this beggar in here?" She stomped her foot like a petulant child. "Get him out. Look at him. He is trying to ruin our night. He is here to beg for money again." "I told you, Lucas. I told you he would come crawling back." She turned to the nearest security guard, a large man named Davis whom I had spoken to on my way in. "Davis, throw him out. Throw him into the street where he belongs. He is trespassing." Davis didn't move. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking straight ahead. Tiffany's eyes bulged. "Did you hear me? I said get this trash out of my house." I continued to walk. Click, click, click. The sound of my shoes on the marble was the only sound in the universe. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. I looked up at them. I looked at Tiffany, whose chest was heaving with indignation. Then I looked at Lucas. Lucas was not shouting. He was gripping the piano for support. He was shaking. He recognized the suit. He knew that fabric. He recognized the watch on my wrist, a Patek Philippe, that cost more than the restaurant's entire kitchen. He realized with a dawning horror that beggars do not arrive in phantoms. Tiffany, Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. "Stop!" "Stop," Tiffany yelled, turning on him. "Why should I stop? He is humiliating us. He is a senile old fool who doesn't know when to die." She looked back at me, her eyes narrowing. "You want money, Henry? Is that it? You want a handout?" She reached into her small clutch purse and pulled out a $100 bill. She crumbled it into a ball and threw it at me. It landed near my feet. "There. Take it and get out. Go buy yourself a bottle of cheap gin and leave us alone." The crowd murmured. Some people looked shocked by her cruelty. Others looked away embarrassed. I looked down at the crumbled bill. Then I looked up at her. My expression did not change. I did not look angry. I looked at her with the cold detachment of a scientist observing a bug under a microscope. I slowly raised my hand and adjusted my cufflink. "I am not here for your money, Tiffany," I said. My voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was deep, resonant, and steady. "Then what are you here for?" she spat. "To ruin my party?" "No," I said. "I am here because I was invited." "Invited?" She laughed, a harsh, hysterical sound. "Who would invite you? You are a ghost. You are nothing." I turned my head slightly and looked toward the corner of the room where Jeremiah Hartman was standing. "Mr. Hartman," I said, "would you please explain to Mrs. Caldwell who the chairman of Phoenix Rising is?" The room went deadly silent. Tiffany froze. Her mouth hung open. She looked at Jeremiah. Jeremiah stepped forward. He walked past the stunned guests until he stood next to me. He bowed his head slightly. "Good evening, Mr. Chairman," Jeremiah said respectfully. Then he looked up at the stage. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell," Jeremiah announced, his voice ringing out clear and sharp. "It is my distinct honor to introduce you to the sole owner of Phoenix Rising, the man who purchased your debt, the man who owns the mortgage on this house, and as of yesterday, the man who owns 51% of your restaurant." Jeremiah gestured to me. "Mr. Henry Caldwell." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Tiffany's face went slack. Her knees gave way, and she stumbled back against the piano. The color drained from her skin so fast she looked like a corpse. Lucas let out a small, whimpering sound. He looked at me, and his eyes wide with terror. He looked at the man he had thrown away, the man he had called a liability. And he realized that the liability had just become his landlord, his boss, and his judge. I smiled. It was a small, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Hello, son," I said. "I believe you were making a toast about self-made men. Please, continue. I am listening." I did not wait for an invitation to speak. I walked up the 3 steps to the platform. The sound of my cane tapping against the wood was the only thing anyone could hear. Lucas stepped back as if I were radioactive. He almost tripped over the piano bench in his haste to get away from me. I reached out and took the microphone from his limp hand. It was warm from his grip and moist with his sweat. I wiped it with my handkerchief before bringing it to my lips. I looked out at the sea of faces. Bankers, socialites, investors. They were all staring at me with a mixture of confusion and awe. These were the people who had eaten at my table for years and then disappeared when I needed help. Now they were back drinking champagne that cost $300 a bottle, standing on marble floors, imported from Italy, celebrating the success of the Caldwell Empire. but I had a question for them. "You are all standing in my house," I said. My voice was calm, but it resonated with a power that made the crystal glasses on the trays tremble. "You are drinking my wine. You are eating food paid for with my money. You are toasting to a success that is built on a foundation of lies." Lucas found his voice. It was a high-pitched squeak. "Dad, please, don't do this. Not here. We can talk in private." I turned to him slowly. "Private. You did not throw me out in private, Lucas. You threw me out on the front porch for the whole neighborhood to see. You humiliated me publicly. You destroyed my reputation publicly, so I will correct the record publicly." Tiffany lunged forward. She looked like a cornered animal. She tried to grab the microphone from me. "He is lying," she screamed, her face distorted and ugly. "He is crazy. He has dementia. Don't listen to him. Security, get him out." I simply held the cane up, blocking her path. I did not touch her. I did not need to. The look in my eyes was enough to freeze her in place. "Dementia," I repeated. "That is an interesting word. That is the word you used to steal my life. You told the world I was sick. You told the court I was violent. You told my friends I was lost. But you forgot one thing, Tiffany. You forgot that I am an engineer, and engineers document everything." I nodded to Jeremiah Hartman, who was standing by the lighting controls. He pressed a button on a remote control. The large projection screen behind the stage descended. The logo of the fake Phoenix Rising Company disappeared. The room went dark save for the flickering light of the screen. It was replaced by a grainy black and white image. The date stamp in the corner read, December 12th, 2018. The night I was evicted. The audio crackled to life. It was Lucas's voice. He was sitting at the kitchen table holding a pen. I recognized the camera angle immediately. It was from the security camera I had installed in the smoke detector years ago, the one they never knew about because they never changed the batteries. "I feel bad, Tiff," the Lucas on the screen said. "He is my dad." Then Tiffany's voice cut in sharp and cruel. "He is a liability, Lucas. We need that money. If we declare him incompetent, we get control of the trust. Just sign the medical form. No one checks the signature on these things. I know a doctor who will verify it for $500. A collective gasp went through the room. A woman in the front row put her hand over her mouth. The video cut to another scene. A week later. Lucas was driving his new car. This footage came from the dash cam I had recovered from the salvage yard after he wrecked the car 3 months later. He was on the phone. "Yeah, he is gone. Frozen to death for all I know. Honestly, it is a relief. If he died soon, it would save us a lot of legal trouble. I just want the inheritance without the baggage." The video cut again. This time it was recent. It was Tiffany in the nursery. She was shoving Leo, my grandson, into his room. "You stay in there and shut up," she hissed at the 4-year-old boy. "If you ruin my party, I will leave you at the orphanage." She slammed the door and locked it. The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy. It was suffocating. It was not the silence of shock anymore. It was the silence of pure, unadulterated disgust. I looked at the guests. They were backing away from Lucas and Tiffany. They were looking at them as if they were monsters. A man set his glass down on a waiter's tray with a clatter, as if the drink had suddenly turned to poison. Lucas was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face, but they were tears of fear, not remorse. Tiffany was staring at the floor, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. Her mask had fallen, and underneath was nothing but rot. I turned back to my son. "You called me a liability," I said softly into the microphone. "You said I had no value, but you failed to realize that integrity is the only currency that matters. And you are bankrupt." I pulled a folded document from the inside pocket of my jacket. It was the contract they had signed with Jeremiah. I opened it to page 14. Paragraph 7, I read aloud. the moral turpitude clause. It states that if the management engages in criminal activity, fraud, or behavior that brings public disrepute to the company, the owner has the right to immediate liquidation of assets. I looked up. You committed fraud against your father. You forged medical documents, and you conspired to abandon a vulnerable person. You have violated every ethical standard in the book. Therefore, I am exercising my right as the chairman. I ripped the contract in half. The sound of the tearing paper was loud and final. This party is over. This house is seized. The restaurant is closed. All assets are frozen effective immediately. Tiffany screamed. It was a primal, desperate sound. No, you can't do this. We have rights. We have a lease. You have nothing, I roared. My voice boomed, startling everyone. You have nothing because you earned nothing. You stole, you lied, and you abused a child. I pointed to the door. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. You will leave everything behind. The cars, the jewelry, the clothes. It all belongs to the company now. It all belongs to me. I turned to the security guard, Davis. Davis, I said, please escort Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell to the exit. If they try to take anything other than the clothes on their backs, call the police. I have the fraud charges drafted and ready to file. Davis nodded. He looked at Lucas with contempt. This way, sir, he said. Lucas looked at me one last time. Dad, he whispered. Where will we go? I looked him in the eye. I saw the fear. I saw the confusion. And for a fleeting second, I saw the little boy I used to love. But then I saw the snow. I saw the empty bank account. I saw Leo locked in his room. I don't know, Lucas, I said coldly. There is a motel on State Street. It costs $40 a night. Maybe you can find someone to lend you the money. I turned my back on them. I heard Tiffany sobbing. I heard Lucas begging. Then I heard the heavy front doors open and close. They were gone. The guests began to leave, filing out in silence. They did not say goodbye to me. They were ashamed to have been part of the charade. I stood alone in the center of the ballroom. The music had stopped. The candles were burning low. I was the master of the house again. I had my revenge. I had my justice. But I wasn't finished. There was one more person I needed to find. The only person in this house who mattered. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a thud. I walked toward the stairs. I had a door to unlock. The heavy oak door slammed shut, with a finality that shook the frame. It was the exact same sound I had heard 5 years ago, but this time I was on the warm side of the wood. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee tearing through the manicured hedges of the estate. I walked to the window and pulled back the heavy velvet curtain just an inch. Under the harsh glare of the security lights, I saw them. Lucas was shivering in his tuxedo, which was damp with sweat, and now freezing against his skin. Tiffany was hugging her bare arms, trying to shield herself from the biting Chicago wind in a dress meant for a ballroom, not a blizzard. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They were pounding on the door, screaming to be let back in, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. I watched Lucas check his pockets. He realized with horror that he had nothing. I had instructed the security team to confiscate the company phones and the company credit cards before escorting them out. He did not even have the $20 he had thrown at me years ago. He was destitute. He was exactly where I had been, but without the dignity of innocence. Tiffany turned to him, screaming something I could not hear, but I could read her lips. She was blaming him. She was already devouring him. They would not last the night together. Poverty has a way of revealing the cracks in a relationship that money papers over. I let the curtain fall back into place. I did not feel joy. I did not feel sadness. I felt balance. The scales of the universe had tipped back to center. I turned away from the window and looked up the grand staircase. The silence in the house was deep and profound. The party was over. The parasites were gone. But there was one life left to save. I walked up the stairs, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the steps. I walked past the master bedroom where Tiffany had spent my money on vanity. I walked past the guest room where I had packed my trash bag. I walked to the end of the hall to the door with the heavy brass lock. I did not have a key. I did not need one. I raised my heavy ebony cane and struck the handle with all the strength of a man who had swung sledgehammers for a living. Once. Twice. The wood splintered. The lock gave way. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the blue glow of a nightlight. It smelled of stale air and loneliness. In the corner, sitting on a rug that cost more than a car, was Leo. He did not look up when I entered. He was rocking back and forth, clutching a small stuffed bear that looked worn and dirty. He was terrified. He expected his mother to come in and scream at him. He expected to be punished for existing. I knelt down on the floor. My knees ached, but I did not care. I placed my cane on the ground and lowered myself until I was at his eye level. "Leo," I whispered. The rocking stopped. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were wide and dark, rimmed with red. He looked at me with confusion. He did not know who I was. To him, I was just the scary man who had yelled downstairs. "It is okay," I said softly, keeping my voice gentle. "I am not going to hurt you. I am your grandfather." He blinked. "Grandfather," he repeated the word, testing it on his tongue as if it were a foreign language. "Yes," I said, "I am your dad's dad, and I am here to take you out of this room." I held out my hand. It was a big, rough hand scarred from years of labor, but steady as a rock. Leo looked at my hand. Then he looked at the open door. Then he looked back at me. He saw something in my eyes that he had probably never seen in this house before. He saw safety. He reached out and placed his small, cold hand in mine. I pulled him into a hug. He was so thin. I could feel his ribs through his pajamas. I held him tight, letting him feel the warmth of my suit, the beat of my heart. For the first time in years, I felt a tear slide down my own cheek. "We are leaving, Leo," told him, smoothing his hair. "We are going to a new home, a real home. There will be no locks on the doors. There will be hot food. And there will be someone to play catch with you in the yard." He buried his face in my shoulder. "Are Mom and Dad coming?" he asked, his voice muffled. "No," I said firmly. "They have to go away for a long time to learn how to be good people. Until then, you are with me." I stood up, lifting him into my arms. He was light, too light for a 4-year-old. I carried him out of that prison of a nursery. I carried him down the stairs, past the debris of the party, past the shattered champagne flutes. We walked out the front door, but not into the cold. My driver was waiting with the rear door of the Phantom open and the engine running warm. I settled Leo into the leather seat and wrapped a cashmere blanket around him. He looked at me with awe. "Are you a king?" he asked, pointing to the silver lion on my cane. I smiled. "No, Leo. I am a builder. And starting tomorrow, I am going to teach you how to build. We are going to build a life where you respect the people who love you. We are going to build a character that does not crumble when the storm comes. You will not be a parasite, Leo. You will be a man. A real man." I signaled the driver. The car glided away from the curb, leaving the dark mansion behind. I did not look back. I looked forward at the sleeping boy beside me. I used to think that family was everything. I used to think that blood was a binding contract that could never be broken. But I was wrong. Family is not about whose DNA you share. Family is about who stands by you when the walls fall down. Family is the people who respect you when you have nothing, not the ones who kick you when you are down. They called me a liability. They thought I was a burden to be discarded. But they forgot that a liability is a debt you owe. And tonight, I collected that debt in full. Do not ever let anyone tell you that you are finished. Do not let them treat you like a line item on a balance sheet. You are the architect of your own value. And if someone treats you like a liability, you remove them from your ledger. You become the asset that they can no longer afford. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the engine. The storm was raging outside, but inside it was quiet. It was warm. And for the first time in 5 years, it felt like home. This story teaches us a painful but necessary lesson about the true nature of loyalty. We often cling to toxic family members simply because we share a bloodline tolerating abuse and disrespect in the name of tradition. However, Henry showed us that allowing yourself to be mistreated is not a virtue. True dignity comes from knowing your worth and having the courage to walk away from those who devalue you, even if they are your own children. Generosity without boundaries creates entitlement, and forgiveness without change invites more pain. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own actions. If this story resonated with you, and you believe that respect is the foundation of any relationship, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I want to know your thoughts. Have you ever had to cut ties with a family member to save your own peace? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, remember to build a life you are proud of.